Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us here at the ARC of Fort Bend County's Parent Education and Support Group meeting today. My name is Carrie Axtell, and I am the Advocacy and Youth Programs Director here at the ARC of Fort Bend. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to grassroots advocacy, family support, and we also provide a variety of social and recreational programs from youth, teens, adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So if you would like to learn more about us and our programs and join us for some fun, reach out to us at our website, arcoffortbend.org, or follow us on our Facebook or Instagram page. If you have any questions today during this presentation, if you'd like, you can type it in the chat if you'd like, and I'll read it to our presenter at the end, or she will be taking questions at the end as well. So today we're very fortunate to have Patricia Lund here to kind of give us some background and information. Tricia is a certified special education teacher with 10 years of classroom experience. And she's also a board certified behavior analyst that spent the last decade working with people with IDDs in rehabilitation and group home settings. So she kind of has that breadth from youth all the way through adults. Tricia is also a certified sexuality educator, and she focuses on teaching relationship safety and boundaries to people with IDD and autism. And if that's not enough, she's also a certified trauma professional, and she provides training to schools and service providers on how to implement trauma-informed practices. And right now, Tricia is studying grief and loss, and specifically how people with disabilities experience grief and how that we as either professionals or caregivers can support them. But alongside her professional background, Tricia also has a personal experience with disability because she has a sister with autism. So in her spare time, Tricia, she's also enjoys traveling and playing the piano and snuggling with her cats. So she has, again, just this wide range of talents and interests. So thank you for sharing with us today, Tricia, how we can help our loved ones with IDD through grief and loss.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Okay, so let's jump right in. Um, just some little caveats before we get started. I noticed that sometimes I get emotional, even when Carrie was bringing up my sister. Got a little teary-eyed because I love her so much. Um, and especially when talking about grief and loss, I have so many clients that are experiencing complications around this, which is why I got started in it. Anyway, so it always brings up feelings, and I used to try to be like, I'm gonna stuff the feelings, and I've learned that I kind of just ride the wave a little bit. So you might notice some tears, and that's just me allowing some feelings to happen while we talk about some of these things. Um, so there are going to be times when I'm going to ask questions and you can put answers in the chat box. You can even like unmute yourself and say something. Because yeah, I'd love to get people's participation and thoughts. So let me see here. Okay, so the kind of already talked about this. This is me. The reason that I started studying, so technically it's called thanatology. So thanatology is the study of death and dying and grief and loss. And I started that because I work primarily in group homes, and so many of my clients, they're adult clients and their caregivers are dying. And no one had prepared them for that. Or because they're getting older, their friends are dying. And because it was never addressed previously, and because no one really knows how to address it, or they feel uncomfortable with death, my clients are kind of left alone to figure this out on their own. And that's been really difficult for them. So I thought, well, I need to go get some additional education in this area to make sure that I'm doing things correctly and compassionately. So right now I'm taking coursework through Edgewood University, and that's where I've been learning all these great new skills. Okay, so these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about how people with intellectual disabilities and autism experience grief. We're going to specifically talk about different grief responses that you might see if you're working with people who have disabilities. And then we're going to talk about some pretty simple ways that you can provide support. And what I love about what we're going to talk about is it's easy, right? I'm not asking you to become an LPC. I'm not asking you to become a mental health practitioner or, invest tons of money. These are really simple things that we can do just to um, make life easier for people with disabilities that are going through loss. And I want to mention loss in general involves a lot of different things, right? Like today we're going to focus on a death loss, but a loss can also be a breakup, being fired from a job, a divorce, moving. Maybe being in a group home and having to go to a different group home. There are losses that we experience all through life, and it's natural to grieve those losses as well. And unfortunately, people with disabilities are more likely to experience loss in general just because of the fact that they have a disability. They don't always have autonomy. They don't get to choose if they move to a different group home. They don't get to choose if a different staff comes in to help them. They don't always have a lot of freedom and autonomy. And so, in general, they're more likely to experience loss. And so, we'll talk about later how we can kind of mitigate that to make the concept of loss a little bit easier for them. Um, so not that you really need an explanation about why it's important to study, but I wanted to bring up a couple things. So like I first said, people with disabilities experience multiple losses. So for instance, I had a client and his dad died, which is hard, horrible, right? I mean, my client's in his 50s, so he's already kind of older. In addition because dad died, he now has to go to a group home. He does not have financial security. He used to be in a band. He played the guitar. Can't go to practice anymore because there's no one there to take him. He has new roommates, whereas before he was used to being taken care of at home. So, in addition to the loss, which was hard, he experienced all of these other things, which kind of made it even more complicated for him. So, we're going to be talking about how to address that because that's really the big piece here for people with disabilities. Also, people with disabilities are less likely to get support. And oftentimes, this is because, well, two things. The idea that people with disabilities are capable of grieving did not even start until the 1980s. Before the 1980s, people still believed that individuals with disabilities were not capable of grieving. And not everyone believed that, but especially in like research and intellectual spaces, that was the line of thought. Like they assumed, well, they have an intellectual disability, so and they don't understand what death is because it's so abstract. So they're not going to get it. So we're not going to worry about it. So it wasn't until truly the 1980s, a researcher in the UK was like, guys, we have this wrong. Let's fix this. Um, and so that's one reason why there's less support because there's less research, but also oftentimes counselors and mental health practitioners and social workers, they mean well, but I don't think they always know how to work with individuals that have communication differences or cognitive differences. So I had a different client whose dad also died, and we wanted to get him into therapy because he was really struggling. We couldn't find a therapist that could figure out how to communicate with him because they're very focused on the talk therapy side of things, and my client couldn't always engage in that. It was really difficult to find additional support for him. Um, Even grief groups. I was recently doing some facilitating with Bo's Place. They do free grief groups, and they're amazing. They have groups for like littles all the way up to teens and adults. And I asked them if they offered anything for people with disabilities. And I said, I'll adapt the curriculum, right? Like I'll take what you have and we can figure it out. And they didn't feel comfortable, not to speak poorly of them, because they're an amazing company. But the places I found that offer grief groups and free grief groups don't always know what to do with people that have disabilities. Um, and then, of course, if you're not getting the support that you need, this is going to make things even more complicated, right? And so I think it's our duties, whether we're professionals or, caregivers or staff, that we find ways to help people through grief because we're all human, right? And ugh, feelings, right? And we will all experience a death loss. We all will. Um, and the best way through a death loss is through support and people and compassion and feeling seen and heard. And so I'm hoping that what we learned today can kind of, increase our ability to do that. So just some quick questions I want you to consider. You're welcome to put answers in the chat box, and I'm going to also, despite the fact that I am studying grief, I still have a lot of discomfort around it. Like I said before, I think the things I'm comfortable with, I just read about because I have a hard time feeling them. So I'm going to go through these questions and I'll pause a little bit after each one, and you can either answer the question in the chat box or you can say a few words. So the first one is, how comfortable do you feel talking about death in general? Maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is I don't feel comfortable at all, and 5 is yeah, I'm all about it. Let's talk about these things. How comfortable are you having those conversations?
This is Jerry. I'm very comfortable. I'm 82, so I'm looking down the road and uh, not that far, but I'm most concerned about how my uh, intellectually disabled granddaughter, who's 14, will how
Mm,
to assist her in when I have my death,
yeah.
because
I
she's
love
very attached.
I love that you're already thinking about that, because that's what we'll talk about too, is we need to start having discussions early, and we can provide deaf education and support early. That way they don't start learning about this and learning how to process through it when that really big loss happens. So I love that you're already thinking about that. Yeah. And then Carrie, you said talking about grief can be uncomfortable because it's vulnerable. Yeah. Yeah, and despite the fact that well, okay, I think I'm comfortable talking about it in intellectual places, right? It is hard for me when it's personal. This sounds so silly. I had a stray cat that died. Um, I love cats and I loved my stray cat, even though he was a stray. And the feelings were hard, and it was hard for me to talk about it because I was afraid of the feelings. So, in this space, I mean, I'd say, yeah, I'm like a 5 or a 6. But when it comes to the actual thing, I think I'm a little bit like further down. Um, I'm going to skip that one. I want to make sure we get through everything. Do you believe that death is something that should be talked about openly, or is it something that we keep private?
Yes.
Yes to both, or yes to open?
Well, yes to talking about it,
Yeah.
but I think some people want to shove it aside. I mean, it's a reality. And
Yes.
especially, like I say, at my age, I'm not going to deny it. I hope to postpone it, but
Right.
it would be ridiculous not to. I have a meeting next week with an attorney about the trust for my granddaughter. So, you have to acknowledge reality.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you brought up, yeah, some really good things there. And it also depends on culture. Like you mentioned we tend to be a little death avoidant, and especially in Western culture, yes. We don't talk about it, or if we talk about it, it's in very like specific settings, but not every culture is like that. So I've seen that that changes, but I also love that you're already thinking about that end of life care, because that's huge. So I told you that my sister has autism, and the other, oh, this was probably years ago. Well, I will be my sister's guardian. There are plans in place. She will be taken care of. That is not a concern she should ever have. But no one really had talked to her about that. We kind of just assumed, oh, she knows, or she doesn't need to know. Um, and one day she asked my dad, well, what's going to happen when you die? Am I going to end up on the street? And when I
Oh,
heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, no, of course you're not going to end up on the street. But because no one had talked to her about that, there was some anxiety that she had. And so I love that you're already thinking of like that planning ahead. And that's so big. That's so big. I love that. Again, I'm just skipping through some. How comfortable would you feel if your child asked you what happens when someone dies? Would you know how to respond? What would you say?
well, regardless of what I feel, I would lie.
Okay. No,
I
tell me
mean,
more.
to reassure her that I'm okay wherever I go, and that I don't know who does know.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something we'll talk more about too. There is some people have a belief in heaven or an afterlife, and that can bring some peace. Sometimes that concept can be a little bit difficult for people with disabilities to understand. Um, so for instance, I had a client and they were told that grandpa went to heaven. And so in their mind, heaven was a place, right? I can pull up this little map and oh, look, here's heaven. And so we saw a lot of searching on, on the internet, well, where's heaven and how do I get to heaven? And even saying things like, well, I'm going to go to heaven so that I can see grandpa again. And everyone thought they were suicidal. They weren't. They were just trying to figure out, how do I get to this place? You know? Um,
Right.
so I think your answer was just perfect. It was reassuring them that, hey, I'm okay. I'm all right, and just gave very simple information. Yeah, I love that. Um, and have you ever discussed death with a child before?
Have I?
Hmm.
I have younger relatives, and I've always just talked about it as a normal thing
Yeah,
because we've had relatives die all through the years, and it's just too commonplace in our family. But I've never talked about, I mean, I just don't see it as anything you can avoid,
right.
but it's inevitable. But
Mm.
I don't know. Um, I worry more about Cece has an IQ of around 49 or so, and I'm not sure. I mean, she doesn't understand what Christmas or birthdays are.
Right.
So talk to her about death, it would just be more discussing sometime when grandma won't be here anymore.
Mm,
But I don't even know that she could have that concept, understand it.
yeah.
It's just, we just take it day by day.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point there too, that sometimes in our haste to give all the information, we give too much information. And so I love to err on the side of, well, let's have the conversation, but especially with someone who maybe has an IQ that is that low, talking about these things might just increase distress. Um,
Right.
and so that doesn't mean we avoid it, right? But we're focusing on different things. Um, so yeah, I love that you bring that up.
When I was a little girl, my grandmother, she knew that she was going to pass. She had kidney failure and several other health complications, and she knew her time, was limited. And so we did have some conversations, and there was a book that she shared, when grandma, grandpa dies. And so those things can be helpful just to have the conversation. And I was grateful that even though I was, a young, you know, teenage, you know, person, it still was helpful, I think, looking back on it, that at least rather than not addressing it at all.
Right, right. Yeah. And I'll share some resources later, but there are lots of really great picture books, especially for kids, that talk about death, but in a more neutral way. Like there's one that I love. I'll have to find it, but it's something about a badger. And Badger ends up dying in the book. But it's done in such a sweet way where it's not this really hard thing, it's a natural thing. And they talk about all the feelings and then they talk about having positive memories and connections. And so there are lots of great resources out there now that I think can be helpful, when you have these conversations with little ones or with people that have disabilities for sure. And I've got more resources on that too. Okay. I'm gonna skip that. Okay, so grief responses are really just any behaviors that we see after a death loss. And one thing that I think is important to know is there's no universal way of grieving. Like, I wish I had a list and I could say, okay, these are the 4 behaviors you can expect from your child, and this is how long they're gonna last. But unfortunately, life is never that easy, right? Um, there's going to be a variety, and it's going to depend on the environment and the culture and how close they were to the person and a previous trauma history. It's going to include a lot. So I kind of go over these just so you can see that there's a broad range and maybe know what to expect. And I think so. Some of the more common ones are crying, right? With someone who has a disability, you might see some physical aggression because they're very distressed and dysregulated. They might lose interest in their day-to-day activities. sleeping and eating difficulties, difficulties in school because it's hard to pay attention after you've had that death loss. Um, and then maybe illnesses can pop up like, more stomach aches, more headaches, and all that's just due to a lot of the feelings and anxiety that happen around that death loss. Um, some ones that are a little bit less talked about, we might see someone who looks like they're not caring, right? So we might tell them that someone died and there's really not a response. And I think in our culture, there's a tendency to think, oh my gosh, you don't care, right? You're not crying. Maybe you didn't love them. And that's not the case, especially with children. Children are so good at knowing how much they can take. And so, especially with them, we're going to see a lot of oscillation and back and forth. So you might see this not caring, right? Okay, well, I'm going to go play Barbies. Thanks, Mom. And then all of a sudden we're crying, and then we're going to go play kickball outside. And that's a child listening to their body and knowing how much their body can take in that moment. So even that oscillation between death and death loss and safe activities, it's completely normal. It doesn't mean they didn't care. It doesn't mean they lack empathy. We also might see some regression in skills. So things that they used to be able to do, now they can't. Some things I've seen are clients that used to be potty trained, but now they're not anymore. Or maybe they had a lot of words and maybe some of those words are going down and they're not using it as much. And that's just because when there's a death loss, it does a toll on your brain and your body, right? You're kind of stuck in this fight or flight mode and dysregulation. And so that's going to impact your ability to pay attention, to remember things you've learned, to use the things you've learned. Um, we might also see trying to avoid reminders of the person. Um, so, for instance, if there's a certain place you used to always go to with your aunt who died, you might avoid that. Well, I don't want to eat ice cream anymore because it reminds me of Aunt so and so. That's okay. Yeah, and we can take that and we can kind of work through that. And maybe we just avoid it for a little bit and see when we can bring it back in. But it's natural to avoid some of those because they're going to bring up hard feelings and you know what you're able to cope with in that moment. Um, a lot of intrusive thoughts. Obviously, these are harder to see. You'd have to rely on the client saying things, but I've even seen, people with autism who have a lot of stereotypy, right? They have a lot of things that they repeat and say. And with some clients, it was very death related, or they were almost like reenacting what they were told when the person died. They just had this new little script that they kept saying. They might be more clingy, especially with other caregivers that are still there. Delayed grieving, this is a big one. And this kind of goes back to not caring. We might, you might not even see a grief response until maybe a year or two after the death occurred. And that can be for a couple of reasons, especially if it's a child or someone that has cognitive difficulties. Um, they may not fully understand that death is permanent and death is irreversible. And it might take them a while to be like, oh, whoa, oh, okay, yeah, I guess the dead is not coming back. Um, and that's also okay because it's going to take some brain development to really understand some of those abstract concepts. So delayed grieving doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. It's just a lot of it is due to, the child and their ability at that time and what they understand. Um, Okay, so I'm going to go through some of these kind of quickly because I want to make sure we get to the important stuff. But especially with people that have autism, the grief reactions and grief responses are going to look different because we
Ma-
can't assume that someone who's neurodivergent is going to grieve like someone who is neurotypical. So, for instance, often in our society, we value crying within a certain scope, right? Like it's okay for you to cry at the funeral or it's okay for you to cry at home. With people that have autism, you might not see emotions, or they might be delayed, or they might be really extreme. Um, you might see an increase in sensory issues. You might see an increase in shutdowns, meltdowns, whereas before they might have been able to be social, that might decrease. Um, they might not be able to articulate what's wrong and explain their feelings. Um, Whereas neurotypical people might search out support and search out groups, people who are neurodivergent may not. They might prefer to process things alone. Um, and they also might not relate to some of the feelings we talk about. So if I have a client who's neurodivergent and I say, oh, okay, so are you feeling mad? Are you feeling sad? Those words might not make sense to them in that moment. Um, because that's not how they like emotionally process things. So like with my clients, I try to avoid like labeling feelings for them, and I ask them to kind of to draw it out. Hey, I'm noticing you're talking about a lot of feelings that you have. What's the size? What's the intensity? If it were a color, what was the color? So trying to move away from words that don't make sense to something that's more like integrative and using a lot of different approaches. Okay, we're gonna skip that video. So some factors that are going to impact grief and how long someone grieves and what the grief looks like is going to be based on a couple things. Their relationship to the person. You might have more intense grief reactions with an immediate family member than you would if a neighbor died. How the person died, I've seen this to be a big one. Sometimes it's harder if the death was not expected. So if someone died because of a car crash, that might be harder than if someone close to them had dementia. And there's some anticipation there, right? Like we're able to see the diagnosis, we're able to see the functioning level. And so sometimes that helps us prepare a little bit more. Whereas this really quick death loss that we weren't prepared for, it might be harder and might mean that you're going to grieve a little bit longer or feel it more intensely. um, how connected they were with the person who died. Jerry kind of mentioned this too, that if we have a really big connection, we're really close to someone, then that's going to make death a little bit harder. And that's okay, right? It just means that that the person was loved a lot. I heard once that a grief is an expression of love. It's how much you loved a person. If you grieve a lot, it's because you loved that person a lot, which I love. Yeah, so Jerry just said if the parent is grieving, the child also not understanding that behavior added to their own confusion, how can a parent deal with that? Oh, okay. So Jerry, are you asking like how, if a parent is grieving, how they can, like if the child doesn't understand why the parent is grieving? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Um, So I've heard a couple things. I've heard that it actually can be really helpful if parents and caregivers are modeling some of those appropriate grief responses and modeling, hey, I'm crying and that's okay. It's okay that mom is feeling sad right now. And then when mom is happy again, okay, yeah, mom is feeling a little bit happy now, and so modeling how to have those feelings, appropriate grief responses. I hate that I use the word appropriate, but I don't have to hit, I don't have to scream. I can cry, I can have my feelings, kind of normalizing all that. So I've heard that having that really helps. Um, a client may not understand a parent grieving, also because it's hard to take their perspective. So if a client isn't always able to take other people's perspectives, then that might be difficult for them. Um, I think what I recommend in times like that is just having a really simple statement in your head that you kind of just repeat. So if they don't understand why mom is crying because dad died, and that makes mom feel really sad, and so she's crying. And that's okay. This feeling won't last forever. And just repeat that as often as they need to. But it's okay. I think it's okay for us to show emotion in front of our clients and children. This is a big one that I see too, the relational dependence on the person who died, especially with my adult clients, and I mean with children too. If if my adult clients were really dependent on their caregiver, right? They depended on the caregiver for a home, for money, for help with hygiene, for buying food, for taking them to different social events. The death is gonna be a little bit harder than maybe if they had less dependence on that person. Okay. So the biggest thing that I would say for anyone when they're going to help someone process or help someone through grief and loss is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be harder for you to take care of another person. Um, and so when I think of self-care in my mind, it's more than just a bubble bath. Like it drives me crazy when I see people that they tout self-care as going and getting your nails done or going and eating a brownie. That's great, right? Like that can for sure bring me happiness, but in the end, that's not making long-term changes. And oftentimes with self-care, there's some long-term changes that we have to make. And that can involve realizing your own personal trauma and your own personal grief. A brownie's not going to fix your own personal grief, right? Like you might also have to go and get some therapy or go to a support group or find people in order to really help through that. Making sure that you're treating yourself with care. I think especially with caregivers and staff and professionals, we get we have a lot of self-judgment, right? Or a lot of self-blame. Why did I do that? Oh, I can't believe I said that. Or why can't I do better? I should know better. I'm a professional, or I've been with this child forever. Yeah, but you also are a human being. So give yourself a little grace. Making sure you have people to support you. And then also saying no. I think that's a huge one. There are things that you can say no to and things you can set boundaries to, that are going to help you have, um, I think, a greater capacity to help yourself and help others when we say no. Okay, so these are some of the things that we can start doing to help, help our clients, help our children go through some of these death losses. We want to make sure that we're providing factual information about death. Um, we want to start teaching death-related vocabulary, ideally early, before a big death loss happens. We want to find ways to involve them in memorials and rituals, and then we want to help cope with secondary losses. So let me just briefly say with the factual information, when I'm talking about factual information, when we're talking about death, we're explaining it in really biological terms. So and so died because blank in their body stopped working. So and so died because this thing happened to them. Especially with children, we tend to see magical thinking. And magical thinking means that they're assuming that there's a connection between something when there's not. So, for instance, I've seen children who think dad got in a car accident because I didn't brush my teeth last night. Or, grandma died of cancer because I forgot to tell her I love her. And I know for us, it doesn't make sense, right? We're like, well, that's not true. That doesn't make any sense. But for a child, that's the connection that they're making. And that can lead to shame, right? Now they feel shame that they potentially caused something. So one of the biggest things we can do is provide really factual information. These are some little social stories that I like, and all of these there's a references section at the end of this presentation, has all of it here. But what I love is it's simple, it has visuals, and it's factual. Some people die after an accident, some people die because they're sick. When people are dying, there are biological things that stop working, right? We stop breathing, we stop talking, we stop moving, we stop feeling, our heart stops beating. And I think that this is so important, especially in this day and age with video games where people die and pop right back up to life. We need to kind of explain death means that there are things in your body that stop working, and that's a permanent thing. Um, so I love this one. And then there's another one here, um, that talks really simply again about what death is, and it means that your body stops working. Again, these are things that happen to a dead body, what a dead body is going to stop doing. Um, and kind of on this too, I also like to prepare my clients for, if there's going to be an open casket funeral, I like to prepare them for that. And so I have some social stories I've written that explain what a dead body looks like, because a dead person does not look like a living person. In basic ways, right? Like you're not going to hear them breathe, you're not going to feel their heart rate, but also because of the way embalming works, the person is not going to look the same. And so in children, you might even see, well, that's not grandma. The grandma doesn't look like that. And they might be right, right? Because of the process, the person might look totally different. And so it's helpful to also front load a child for that. Well, and give them choices too, right? Hey, we're going to go to a funeral. There's going to be an open casket where you can see your aunt. Is that something that you want to see? And then if they do, kind of explain it. Okay, well, it's going to look and feel a little bit different. If you touch your aunt's face, it's not going to feel warm because she's dead and the blood isn't, going through her body. It might feel a little cold. It might feel a little stiff. If you put your ear next to her mouth and nose, you're not going to hear her breathing. So kind of prepping them for that. Even the skin color, right? The skin color is going to look different because we've got a lot of makeup and there's no blood in the body. So I find it helpful to have that conversation too. These are some books that I love, by Books Beyond Words. Um, the company is based in London, but you can still order the books online. But there's very little words in here. It's a lot of pictures, and they talk about these sensitive topics. When someone dies, when mom dies. They even have books about when I will die, right? Like for clients who have to accept their own mortality or might have an illness. They have ones about funerals, just really, really great stuff. Another thing that we can do is we can use really clear language and avoid euphemisms. Um, and it's so natural, right? We're uncomfortable talking about death. Death is scary and sad. And so, one way that we often deal with that is using words like passed away or lost or went to sleep. Um, However, for people with disabilities, this can kind of create some confusion. So, for instance, I had a client and the parents, it was just hard, right? It was hard for the parents to tell the client that their grandpa had died. And so what they said is, "Hey, hun, we lost grandpa last night." And they kind of left it at that, right? Well, now my client's eloping and leaving the house because they think grandpa's lost. I'm going to go find grandpa, right? I'm going to solve this problem. And so we had to fix that and reteach that with correct information. Um, and so while it might be hard for us to use words like dead and death and dying, when we're working with people that have disabilities, it's helpful to use those really clear words. Um, and so I've just had to practice. I just practice in my car too, right? I say the words over and over again. There are even things called death cafes. And this is just a group of people that get together either virtually or in person, and they talk about death, anything death related. And that was a really good way for me to just practice saying the words and, sitting with some of these difficult topics. So definitely trying to use really clear words. So this is a quote by Mr. Part of Core Principle 5 states that feeling heard helps, hold on, helps us know that we're not alone. I'm sorry, there was like some speak over. Give me one sec.
Oh, I didn't know I was on camera.
Okay, I think that's fine. I'm so sorry about that, a little difficulty there. Okay, let me check. Okay. All right, can you see it, Carrie, the presentation? Yeah, okay. So this is a quote by Fred Rogers that I just love. He says that my little screen is cutting off the top. Carrie, can you read the first sentence for me?
Yes. It says anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable.
Perfect. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people that we trust with the important talk can help us know that we're not alone. And I like, how simple is that, right? Like, if we can mention something, if we can just talk about something, that in and of itself is going to make it more manageable. And what I often see is, especially with clients who use communication devices, they don't have any of these vocabulary words programmed into these words here. I don't even know how it flipped, but these words right here. We haven't programmed them into their devices, and we haven't specifically taught them words like dead and death and dying, or all gone as it might relate to a person. um, Question words: where, how, when, how did they die, when did they die, when are they coming back, funeral, casket. If we don't program these words into an AAC device and we're not actively teaching them, our client, our child will never be able to talk about death, which means that they're going to have a hard time processing it. So I think that this is a big thing. And definitely, especially if you're, a clinician, try to involve like a speech therapist. And I think this is where parents can advocate too, right? They can go to their speech therapist and say, "Hey, I noticed there's some really important words that are not included in their device. Can we make a plan about how to teach those and when to teach those?" Um, and then one way that we can start early when it comes to normalizing death is we're going to start with really early neutral experiences. So death education is kind of on this continuum, right? We have neutral things like, "Oh, hey, this plant died," or "there's a dead possum on the side of the road," to the death of an acquaintance. So that could be someone they're not close to, but they might feel the impact a little bit, but it's not huge, to the death of a caregiver, and then down to their own death and their own mortality. And so what I suggest is we start here, right? Especially when they're younger. We're starting with really neutral experiences. Um, like little biology lessons, like bringing a dead plant and a live plant. Well, okay, well, which one of these is dead? Yeah, and which one is alive? Well, why? Why is this one dead? How do we know it's dead? And they can list off the characteristics. This isn't working. That's not working. Okay, well, how do you think it died? What happened? And so we can start introducing that vocabulary in a really safe way. And this is stuff that can just happen, throughout the day. You know, and as much as we say that we're a death avoidant culture, in some ways we are, in some ways we're not. If you look at the video games and the TV shows that a lot of children view, they encounter death quite frequently, but they encounter inaccurate information about death. And so I also think it's beneficial to to have discussions then. Oh, hey, when you were playing that video game, I noticed that you just died. Oh, that's interesting. Is that something that really happens in real life? Is that something that could really happen to you? Or is that just a video game thing? You know, so using those natural opportunities to give them factual information about
With
death.
TV shows I like to watch, my granddaughter will say, "Who murdered her?"
Who murdered her? Right? Another topic of conversation. I love that. Um, okay, so these are just some questions to consider if your child does have a communication device. Um, uh, are there death-related vocabulary in there? Sometimes there's stuff that's programmed in. It just hasn't been taught yet. So kind of going through and seeing what death-related vocabulary is in there. And if it's not in there, why is that? Is it because the speech therapist doesn't feel comfortable? Is it because I don't feel comfortable? Um, do we have a plan in place to actually get those words programmed in, right? Like there might be some words we have to know before we can know some more complex ones. Is there a plan in place to address these? Um, are the death-related terminology that we're teaching culturally relevant? And I think this is especially useful for clinicians if they have a variety of clients from a variety of cultures. We're not going to program words like, you know, funeral or wake if the client's culture doesn't has different words for those, or they don't always use those activities. And then if we know a death loss is coming, what words can we already start teaching now before that death loss is actually going to happen? And this is really going to help with, you know, the anticipation and giving words before the difficult thing happens. So these are some reasons that people might avoid teaching some of these death-related concepts or vocabulary. So I'm going to read through each one, and then you can put a finger up or in the chat box maybe which one is kind of a barrier for you. I might not be addressing death-related vocabulary because my child or client needs to learn other vocabulary first. I'm not sure how to teach it. I'm uncomfortable talking about it, or I'm worried that my child is going to have behaviors, challenging behaviors when I start talking about it. So which ones do you guys feel are the most difficult for you?
Number 2.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I think for me, it's number 4. I worry about, you know, especially as a behavior therapist, I'm not really supposed to invoke like challenging behaviors, but if I talk about death, I might. And then, yeah, Carrie, you said a 1 and a 2. Yeah, for sure. And I think a big part about being grief informed is bringing awareness to this. You know, if we continue to avoid death and not really think about, hey, what's standing in the way, then we're going to kind of continue in this really death avoidance system that's not preparing people. So anything that's going to increase awareness, I think, is so, so good. These are some resources that I absolutely love. So this was made by Irene Tuffy Wine. She's a researcher that's in the UK, and she's specifically doing work with people that have disabilities, prepping them for their own death. But she's also made a lot of really great things. Like these are some books that are very like sensitive because they use people that have disabilities. People with disabilities have helped make the actual materials. These two are a little bit wordy, but she has a whole packet and all of it's free, and those aren't as wordy. So I love that, and anything by her is absolutely amazing. She's got they're called little funeral cards, and they can provide pictures that help walk through what a funeral can look like, but they also help people with disabilities plan for their own funeral, which I know is a whole other topic. But I had a client, she was in her 50s, and I don't even know how the topic came up, but I'm glad it did. Her mom was asking her what she wanted her funeral to look like. And the sweetheart, she didn't care, but she wanted to be buried with her cell phone and her cell phone charger. And when we reassured her that that would happen, girl, there is very little anxiety about death because she's getting off her cell phone. So it's something to think about, right? This is another one from Down Syndrome Scotland. And I think that this can be helpful if people want to start writing their own social stories. It doesn't include a lot of pictures, but I love that it has very simple language that's clear. And so this can be a helpful starting point for clinicians that might feel they have to like write their own social stories but don't know where to start. And this is one of my favorite websites. It's called Winston's Wish. And they have a lot of materials that are just geared towards people that have intellectual disabilities. Um, they do not ship to the US, but you can download their stuff. And these books I love because they have a whole set of books about all the different feelings that can pop up when someone grieves. Um, we have anger, right? We've got relief because sometimes there's relief. And I think if someone feels relief, they might feel concerned. Why do I feel relieved that that person is dead and gone? Does that mean that I don't love them? No, it doesn't mean that. And so I love these books because it really goes through all the emotions that you can see. All right, so involving them in death rituals or memorials. So there is research that shows that involving someone in a death ritual is actually going to really help them process grief. And that I'm not saying we're going to force someone to do all of the things, but as much as they can do is going to be really helpful. So just some kind of tips. Well, some common death rituals that we have could be wakes, funerals, memorials. Sometimes people have like death celebrations, lighting a candle, all these different things. And we want to make sure that there are ways that people with disabilities can also be involved in this. And so a couple of things to think about is first, we're going to front load, right? Because it's a new thing, it's a scary thing. So, as much as we can front load and help prep someone for what the funeral is going to look like, the better. So, I've seen a couple things. You can find just really general videos online. I mean, in a pinch, that's okay. It might not be great because it's not as individualized. You can take pictures, maybe take a picture of the funeral home, or take a picture of the casket, or take a picture of what the pews are going to look like, or take a picture of the gravesite, kind of show them what that's going to look like. Um, I think it's also big to offer choices um, because, again, children can oscillate between feelings of safety and then they're able to push themselves through hard things. And so we want to make sure that we're not forcing participation, but we're offering them choices. Hey, it looks like we're going to sing some hymns next. Is this something that you want to stay for, or do you want to go take a break? So that's another way we can kind of involve them in it. I've also seen, especially for children, there are some funeral homes that will have like a little play area, and sometimes it's in that same room, right? There might be a little play area with some dolls or some little coloring books or little sensory toys, because the child can kind of go to a place where they feel safe when the feelings are big, and when they're ready, then they can come back out and participate, and then they've got a safe place to go again. And so simply having a safe place might increase how long they can actually do some of these death rituals for. I've also seen, if you're going to try to involve a child or someone with a disability, it's best to have someone that can help them, right? That can transition from the play space to the funeral space, back to the play space. But it ideally shouldn't be someone who is really struggling and really grieving. And so if mom is the one that is really struggling and really grieving, it might not be the best idea for her to jump back and forth with the child because she also needs that time to grieve. And so if you can find someone else who can support and be able to jump all the places the child is jumping and help handle some of the feelings that are happening, that's going to be ideal. Um, yeah, so and one other thing I've seen is that sometimes there's maybe a private funeral for the client. So we know that the client is going to really struggle with a crowd, especially if there's really scary things that are happening. And so we do it early. Okay, we're going to go by ourselves. We're going to let you look at the casket, maybe look at the body, touch the body if you need to. So sometimes just doing it with not a lot of people is another way that they can support. I've also seen children and clients play a more active role, like they might choose the hymns that are sung, they might pick the flowers, they might have a special little picture that is displayed right by where the person in the casket is. So you can also really individualize it and make it special. And one other thing I would recommend is taking pictures or videos. Um, because it can be helpful, especially for a child or someone with a disability, to go back and look at it. Because sometimes looking at it and replaying it makes it a little bit more real. So if they're asking, oh, well, where's grandma or where's so and so? Let's pull up the video. Let's look at the pictures. Hey, do you remember? Do you remember when we had that funeral for grandma? Let's look. Let's find you. Look, see, there you are right there. And there's grandma and she's lying in the casket. Let's look. What else did you do there? And so you can do it in a really gentle way that's helping remind the child of the fact that death is permanent and irreversible. And I'm okay. I'm okay, even though death is both of those things. These are some things that I've made. Um, if you go to Teachers Pay Teachers, I have a link to this too, but all of this is free. If you need icons in a pinch, here's some icons you can use to make a schedule or offer choices. A lot of them are very Eurocentric because that's where, my expertise lies. But if you need something that's more culturally relevant, you can reach out and we can make something together for sure. Continuing bonds. So this is just a bond that's going to it's an emotional bond that helps you still feel a connection with the person who died. And I like to explain it as it's very valuable, right? Not having some sort of connection. It could be, we bake cookies that grandma used to make, at Christmas. And while we bake them and eat them, we kind of remember her. Or we have a little candle that we light on the anniversary of their death, and that helps us remember them. Or I've seen with children, we have a special pillow that was made out of, grandpa's old t-shirt. And that's how I remember him, and I can kind of smell him. And that can definitely bring comfort. It might cause some grief reactions because it's also sad, but that's okay. We have to feel those feelings. We can't run from them. I like to kind of explain to my clients, if they're able to get this concept, that it is one-sided. When I'm giving you a pillow that has, it's made of your grandpa's t-shirt, that can help you remember him. But it's not like he's necessarily going to come back to life because you have this pillow, right? Because I also don't want to give incorrect information about like what death can look like. But these continuing bonds are huge, and you can be really creative with them too. Or involve the child. What should we do? What can we do to remember dad? What do you want to do? Okay, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is secondary losses. So I touched on this a little bit. The primary loss is the person that actually died. And then the secondary loss are all the additional things that the client or individual has now lost because of the death. So it could include having to change schools, having a new or unfamiliar staff member taking care of them, having to leave home in short notice, or maybe go to an emergency placement, especially if they live in a group home. They may not have access to recreational or leisure activities, like my client who played the guitar, who wasn't able to play the guitar anymore because no one could drive him to his practice sessions. There might be a loss of independence. If we're used to a caregiver driving you around places, and now that caregiver dies, that means independent decreased a little bit. The routines might change, especially for individuals that are neurodivergent and really rely on that routine. The disruption in the routine can make things a little bit more difficult. And especially for people who have disabilities, the secondary losses might feel bigger than the primary losses. So for instance, I had a client, and I can't remember who it was, but there was someone in their direct family that had died, and this person used to always go take them out to McDonald's on the weekend, and he loved that. He got to get out of the group home, go eat his chicken nuggets and fries. And so when we talked about the death and we kind of told him this was happening, his biggest concern was that he didn't know who was going to give him his French fries. Which is That's fine. Because for you in this moment, the biggest concern is, where are my French fries coming from, right? And if that's your biggest concern, we can fix that, right? Like, that's a secondary loss that we can find a way to fix. So also not judging that, right? There was no judgment on this client at all. There are reasons that, I don't know, French fries mean a lot, and that's okay, right? I won't go through that case example, but so what I like to do with my clients, let me see, is I like to make a list of the people in their life, and I include the person who has died. And then I look at all the things that the person who died did for them, right? Like, maybe I saw them on holidays. Maybe they gave me money. Maybe they drove me to church. I got to see them every weekend. I felt happy when I was with them. So you're losing all of this. So what can we do to still make these things happen? Can we find extended family to come and visit you? Can we find church members that will take you to church? Can we find other people that are willing to come consistently to visit you? Can I help you identify other people that you also feel safe with? So addressing some of those secondary losses is really, really key. Okay. And then the last thing I'd want to mention is that there's a tendency. So the 5 stages of grief is a model that was developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. This was back in World War II. And we have kind of over-identified with this. Oftentimes, if you look for, coping with grief or coping with loss, these are going to come up. And so you're going to see these 5 stages, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the idea is, hey, if you're grieving, you're going to go through all of these things, but guess what? You're going to reach the point of acceptance. How cool is that? The problem is this is not a useful way to look at grief. First of all, there's no prescriptive way to get through it, right? It's going to look a little messy, and grief is not linear. Grief doesn't have this end timeline. Because we care about people, the grief that we feel might stay with us for a while. And that's okay. There are times when it's bigger and times when it's smaller. But I think it's unreasonable to expect that one day grief will just be gone. It's also not culturally sensitive. In the West, we tend to view things as very linear, but in indigenous practices and Eastern practices, they don't view it that way. And so when we're pushing kind of this belief, it might not be sensitive, and it also might pathologize people that are still grieving and still having a difficult time. So what I like to, the way that I like to look at grief instead is that our capacity changes. Grief might be this ball, right? That sits in our hearts, sits in our stomachs, sits in our head. But our capacity to hold that grief and to hold it gently and to feel it and to learn from it, that is what is going to change. And to me, that's beautiful because it acknowledges the love that is there. But it also acknowledges that human beings are able to do hard things, right? Like our capacity is going to increase and we're going to be able to deal with difficult things. So I prefer to use that with my clients. Really quickly before we go, especially because you are here and you're taking the time to talk about difficult things, sometimes I think it's helpful to have a thought that maybe can help ground yourself. So the ones that I have up here, maybe think about the one that maybe feels right for you in this moment. When a client or a child is grieving, you can think, hey, I get to be here for this. Or you can think they're doing this with me because I'm their safe person. Or I'm just going to love them through this, right? The crying, the screaming, the questioning, I'm just going to love them through this. They're having a hard time. They're not giving me a hard time. There's a difference. Feelings are like a wave. I'm going to let the feelings come in. I'm going to let them go. It's the same for us and for the kids and the clients that we serve. And the last one is that this belongs as part of my human experience. This grief has a place because it's part of being human. So I hope that there's a thought there that kind of resonated with you that can help you when you are sitting with someone who's going through grief or when you're going through your own grief and loss. So here's my contact information. If you feel that you want to connect or you want more resources, definitely feel free to reach out. I also have a list of picture books if you feel like you need some picture books. And then these are all the resources that I mentioned. And I think that's it. Yeah, the resources. Yeah. So I think if you want a copy of this, I can send it. Or Carrie,
That would be great. Actually, that was one of the questions I was going to have was just when I send this out, maybe for those who didn't know, if you weren't able to attend this video live and in the moment and ask the questions, first of all, thank you, Tricia, for being willing to, talk to those people when they do reach out to you. You do have Tricia's contact information. But if you contact me here at the ARC as well, I'm happy to share this video with you so you can watch it. And the resources, I will email out those resources along with the videos. So yes, Tricia, if you're able to just copy and paste that those links as well.
Yeah.
I will include that to everybody who registered for the event or later on wants to have a copy of it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I really liked the visual about that grief is there because that's truly what you feel like. Yes, it comes in waves, but it's still at its core always there. What really changed, the grief didn't change.
Right.
Our ability or our capacity to, either handle it, go with the wave of it, respond in it in however way we're doing it at that time, and it will be different things. That different ways we might respond to it is really what's changed, not the grief, because it's always there.
Yeah.
And that kind of gives respect to the fact that that person in your life, they're not diminished in any way. The grief that you feel is not diminished in any way. We, in our capacity as a human being, we have moved to go around that. So I think that visual does such a great job of conveying that.
Good.
And one of your other points there is just it is part of being a human being. So even though it's tough, there's things that we wish that we didn't have to do or experience in life sometimes when it's negative, but there is a lot of dignity in the fact that we all get to experience the good and these tough times as well, and helping each other through it, our loved one with a disability as well. They're being part of the human experience, just like we are. Yeah. Were there any questions anybody else wanted to ask? I know earlier Jerry had made a comment, if the parent is grieving, the child is also not understanding that behavior and added to their own confusion. How can a parent deal with that?
Yeah. So yeah, I briefly talked about that, but I said that I do think it's healthy to show yourself grieving, because if we only portray this really stoic person, then we are teaching people to be death avoidant, and we are teaching people that the only acceptable feeling is no feeling. So I do think it's okay to show that. As long as you also kind of have some control over it, right? Like if you feel like you're out of control, I don't know if that's the most appropriate time to show the client what's going on, but I think it's okay to cry. Yeah, to cry, to swear, to talk. I think one of the big things a hard thing that might be for our clients is sometimes they might not have perspective taking skills, and so that can make it difficult. They might not understand, well, why is mom crying? And so I think having a really simple statement to explain that. Hey, mom is crying because grandma died, and that makes mom feel sad. And that's okay. I'm going to feel sad for a minute. And maybe kind of, continue to go back and say that same statement. Because again, what we'll see with a lot of clients is one way that they process is they keep bringing up the same information. And it's not that they're being troublesome. It's not that they are trying to annoy you. Sometimes we have to just repeat that information to really help them learn it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. Well, lots to think about, lots for us to process, but thank you for just walking us through all these wonderful resources and just the rationale and helping us see it in a different way, and so we can embrace it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me do this. I'm so passionate about this topic, so I'm glad I got to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Tricia.